Welcome to Mortification of Spin, a casual conversation about things that count, with Carl Trueman and Todd Pruitt, a podcast of the Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals. Let's join this week's conversation.
Welcome to Mortification of Spin. My name's Carl Trueman. I'm Professor of Biblical and Theological Studies at Grove City in Western Pennsylvania. And coming to the end of a year when I've been on loan to the University of Notre Dame in South Bend, Indiana. I'm here as always with my good friend, longest-standing friend, Todd Pruitt, who is the pastor of Covenant Presbyterian Church in Harrisonburg, Virginia, which is a congregation of the Presbyterian Church in America. Great to be with you as always, Todd.
Good to be with you, Carl. Good to see you as always. I'm very happy. We've talked about this a little bit, but very glad that you have been able to spend a full school year at Notre Dame, and you're still coming back to us. So we're all relieved. We've breathed a sigh of relief.
Well, I have this. Somebody who will remain nameless at Grove City College apparently announced to a group of staff that I'd signed a contract with Notre Dame and was never coming back. Whether that was wishful thinking on his part, I don't know.
Could have been. Yeah.
Very happy to reassure the dean, the president, and my head of department that no, I was not going behind their back, and that I was going to honor the terms of the loan. So, but talking of Notre Dame, it's a great pleasure to have as our guest today the wife of a distinguished professor at the law school. Some of our listeners may know the name Carter Snead. Carter is the author of a book that if you haven't read, I think you should get hold of it. What does it mean to be human? Published, I think, in 2020, which is a penetrating look at the issue of bioethics as it surrounds particularly the beginning of life and the end of life.
It's a great book.
It's a great book. Any pastor out there who perhaps struggles to address some of the bioethical challenges that are hurtling towards us and becoming, it seems, more complicated by the day, would do well to get hold of that book and to read it and think through the kind of arguments that Carter is making. But perhaps the greatest thing about Carter is the person who agreed to be his wife, Leigh Snead. And she, too, is an author and has written a book that my own wife pretty much read at a single sitting. She found it such a page-turner. It's Leigh Fitzpatrick Snead, and the book is Infertile But Fruitful, Finding Fulfillment When You Can't Conceive. And it's not only a deeply moving book, talking about the struggles that she and Carter had with conceiving a child and then adopting children, but it's also a book that raises in a powerful form and in a narrative form many of the kind of challenges that young couples who desperately desire to have children, but for some reason find they cannot have children, will be facing. Leigh, it's such a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Thank you. I've been really looking forward to this day.
Well, it's great to have you on. And normally we kick off by asking the cliched question, why did you write this book? I think it's patently obvious why you wrote this book. Maybe I could reframe that question and say, what was your hope for your readers in writing this book?
I wanted people to feel, immediately I thought of people like myself, maybe like myself 20, 30 years ago. And I wanted them not to feel alone, because it's really easy to feel alone. And I know that sort of isolation is a theme throughout the book that I address. And I wanted it to be conversational. Obviously, if you're reading it, it's passive on the reader's end and just all of me sort of blah, blah, blahing. But I wanted it to have that feel that if we were having a conversation, these are the kind of things I would share with you. These are the things that I think, would hit home with you. And I also wanted to give people in different ministries, priests, um, people who would be counseling or speaking, even doctors, I think, maybe doctors with not the greatest bedside manner, need to have that sort of language, that sort of read that that lived experience of what that looked like over the course of, a pretty long marriage. I mean, I was, sort of on the in my late 40s then when I completed the book. Just to sort of have that sort of infertility vernacular, those things that maybe if you haven't suffered from that, you wouldn't know, like feelings people have, the shame that comes from it, the embarrassment that comes, just all these sort of surprise things that I don't think would naturally occur. Mostly you would just think sort of sad or maybe jealousy, but there's a lot of feelings that I think, but that's really the response that I'm getting to from people, especially people I don't know, who are reaching out saying like, I felt that way too, or this was like I had an incident like that too, and I thought I was crazy, or I thought I was evil for feeling this way. So that kind of connection. And I also wanted it to help people who, just, husbands, sisters, friends, anyone who's in, like who loves someone who's experiencing this, to give that if they don't know how to help, how to talk to them. Again, thinking they can read my story and find an entryway into, that conversation with their loved one.
I spent time. I read the book. I took a couple hours yesterday, and then I finished it up today. And I was really moved. I was helped by it, I'll say this to our listeners: if you get this book and read it, it will move you, not in some cheap sentimental way, but move you in a deep way as Leigh takes you through her and her husband's story. But also, Leigh comes at this from a Roman Catholic perspective, but I'm a Presbyterian pastor, and I appreciated it very much. And one of the things that you will be helped by if you're a Protestant reading this book is that you will be helped to think through certain issues that, for the most part, most Protestants aren't trained to think about. We're trained to think about some of the big questions. We're pro-life. I'm thankful for that. But wow, we're pro-marriage. We're pro-biblical marriage, traditional marriage. But then we don't always connect certain dots that Roman Catholics have for years, and maybe we ought to think about a few of those things, such as, and Carl and I were talking about this one-on-one a couple of hours ago, such as if the telos of marriage, if the goal of marriage is laid out, which it is in Genesis, as a one flesh union between husband and wife, so there is that spiritual, emotional, physical oneness that conjugal love creates between a husband and wife. And we know from the Genesis account that the other half of that telos of marriage is also to produce other little people. Now we know that there are exceptions, thus the thesis, the story that Leigh recounts from her own experience, but that doesn't change what is typically to be thought of. And one of the things that Carl and I have talked about before is we're not sure if we're 100% persuaded yet on the Roman Catholic position of birth control, but we find ourselves feeling like we're on the back foot trying to take a swing at it. Like it's our Roman Catholic neighbors have a well-developed philosophy and theology around this, which I can see justified from Genesis 2. I can see that justified. We may connect the dots a little bit differently, but it is at minimum something that Protestants ought to be thinking about very carefully, because if our Roman Catholic neighbors, and Carl, correct me if you think I'm wrong on this, if our Roman Catholic neighbors are right on a prohibition on birth control, then it's an important matter. We can't, as Protestants, just say it doesn't matter. It does matter, right, Carl? I mean, we're saying, that question matters.
And I might ask Leigh at this point, what would you, how would you connect what you talk about in this book with the Catholic position on birth control as a way of pushing back against what is the default Protestant position?
I
What
was
would you do
thinking,
to make us think more deeply about it?
Yeah, well, I'll say this. I'll start here that, even with the methods that are licit for Catholics, natural family planning, those sort of natural,
Hmm.
like cycle monitoring things, there really does. And this took me a long time to understand. And I think it's not, I think you get maybe like 1 day of it, which is like probably an hour in marriage prep courses.
Hmm.
That there has to be a grave reason to use those methods to avoid pregnancy. And then also there's, another sort of phrase to think about is the contraceptive mentality. And so if you're using that as, I mean, and this is why I think a lot of Catholics, I mean, statistically speaking, do use, the pill or other forms of birth control because they're thinking, well, I'm using this to avoid pregnancy anyway. What's the
Right.
difference? This is just sort of easier. I don't have to really think about it or chart or take my temperature or something. So this contraceptive mentality, I think, is something that is it takes it from just sort of like what method are you using to it seeming like a technicality to feeling like a real understanding of how our bodies were designed and made and why they were made that way. And you talk about the one flesh union and what marriage is. And of course, I'm not really very fluent in this on the Protestant side of things, but the sacramental part of
Mm.
marriage, I think, is a big part of our teachings on birth control. But
Hmm.
it's a slippery slope, I think, in either direction. But I think that to understand that we as Catholics don't just think sort of barrier or chemical makes it bad and because God created us naturally and we're natural, it's, this more, this, this, um, it's a cognitive turn towards, when you're talking about the telos, like how we were
Hmm.
designed, what marriage is for,
Yeah.
what we're doing, and how we are also, how we offer all of that, to God.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I heard someone say one time that oftentimes when the procreative purpose behind marriage and conjugal love with marriage, when that's thought little of, then we end up turning conjugal love into little more than a mutual pleasuring society.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and while clearly, God creates it to be pleasurable, and that's great. Thank God for that. Um, uh, Clearly, given the potentiality of procreation, um, I think we can say, because one of the things that we as Protestants want to push back, one of the things we use to push back against so-called same-sex marriage is that it is fundamentally non-procreative, and that
Mm.
marriage, by its purpose, is procreative.
Mm.
Well, okay, if we're going to say that, and this goes back to Carl and I's conundrum that, okay, don't know that we're 100% there yet, but there's a connection to be made in our objection to gay marriage,
Hmm.
which is it can't be marriage because it's not procreative.
Yeah.
Therefore, marriage probably should be more than just it's procreative if you want it to be.
Right.
And so that's where the struggle is, and why I want my fellow Protestants to at least think about this. If you don't buy the position of prohibition on all birth control, fine. Let's just think through it, though, and actually have an argument for that that's beyond just not thinking about it.
Yeah, and I
So,
think that's always a great idea. And one thing I really like about it too, I mean, I feel like infertile or not, I'm 50 now, so the procreative part is, it's not really part of my thinking, in the day-to-dayness of all that. But it is the fact that the procreative and the unitive exist together and equally is a reminder of sort of like what that's all about. It's almost like abstaining from meat on Fridays.
mhm,
That's something that we practice all year long in our house. And it's just a little reminder, or I imagine just like keeping kosher. It's, because it has to do with those sort of everyday things. It's just a little bit of a reminder because it's easy to get to Sundays again and be like, oh, Jesus, I haven't thought about you in 7 days
mhm,
since last time I sat here. And I think just having those sort of like really corporeal reminders, things you eat, like the way you have sex, like all these things just kind of keep your, you know, or just keep you ordered toward, the good and God.
yeah.
Yeah.
If I could pivot in a sort of pastoral direction at
Hmm.
this point, one of the most moving parts of the book, Leigh, reminded me of something Liz Kirk, who you and I both know, Catholic University of America.
I was just with her.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Liz is lovely,
Yeah.
and she's had great influence on me and my thinking on these things. And she gave a lecture where she made the comment that infertility is experienced differently by men and women because as a woman, every month you're reminded of your failure. And you make this very moving comment in the book about how every month you'd realize, oh, it didn't happen again. And you'd have the burden of going and telling Carter, telling your husband. What would you say to what do husbands need to know? If in a husband and wife are struggling with infertility, what would you want the husband to know about in order for him to be able to serve his wife and support his wife as she needs to be supported in these situations?
Whenever I get asked that question, I'm always kind of like, oh, can I just call Carter in here for a minute? Because I don't have any, of course now I'm like, did I put something in the book bad that he did? But I don't really have any negative memories of what he did. I think if you're already together, putting your marriage first and foremost, and realizing that, and this is so hard when all you want is a baby, and to be parents together with this person, you married them to be a parent with them, and all you want, it's really hard to remember that you are already a family. But if you can, and then also I think too, Elizabeth and I both speak from a position where it was female infertility, but both of our husbands were very good about this is our infertility because this is our marriage, it's our marriage bed, it's our marital act that's not working to create our children. This is our infertility. And I think if a husband treats it that way too, and does this, it gets as involved as you can. You may have, obviously there's going to be different personality quirks about how much your wife wants you like measuring out medicine or helping you chart or whatever that, you figure that, that stuff out. But I think that really realizing that this is something for both of you while still remembering Elizabeth's point that it is experienced differently for the woman, and no matter what, she's going to feel like that burden in particular because she's the one, she gets the bad news first. She is the one who is not pregnant. So, and all these plans are like, even so, if you have a career, you have to plan things that's around the wife's pregnancy. Like the man doesn't have to worry about, now there is some nice paternity leave packages I'm learning, but still, it's not the same thing. They don't have to go to the hospital, all these things. But I think that, I think just being there, realizing that it's both of you who are experiencing this. And, again, just putting your marriage, making that a priority and rather than like the getting pregnant a priority.
There's really interesting comment in your book that I'd never heard it expressed this way, but I thought it was really helpful when you're writing about your experience of adoption. And I think it may be a quote from John Paul II. I'm not sure, but the quote refers to adoption as being, in a sense, procreative.
Yeah.
For the adopting family. Explain that kind of from your own experience. Oh, and by the way, share, if you don't mind, share with our listeners how many children you and Carter have.
So we have 4 children. Our oldest is 21 and our youngest is 4. The 2 in the middle are identical twins. They're 15 now. I think it's that whole being open to life, that we talk about a lot, that again, with the, instead of practicing, birth control, the openness to life, just the way fruitfulness, you can be fruitful and it doesn't have to be a baby. Like there's lots of fruits in the basket, right? I think that being open to life means that if your vocation is to parenthood, then again, you might not have a specific vocation to adoptive parenthood, but that radical hospitality that really is a grace. It's not something, people sometimes ask Carter and I how we discerned that adoption was our next step, and it was just the obvious next step to us. In fact, when you read in the book, if you read in the book, that you'll see that we did both at the same time. We still pursued like avenues to try to get pregnant while we adopted our different children, which is part of the reason why there's such big age gaps, because it's hard to have a lot of things going on at once. But yeah, I think one example is that one of our we had a contact who was expecting, like, who knew someone who knew someone, which is sometimes how adoptions end up working, who was, unexpectedly pregnant and wanted to look into placing a baby for adoption while our twins were just over a year old, and we were still sort of like underwater with that. And then we just thought, but they had heard about us from their friend of the friend, and we're just like, okay, this is it. This is the infertile version of being open to life. That adoption didn't work out, but it was just sort of like, if this is the way to go, you just open your heart, and then you create a family, and you graft that little tiny soul onto your family tree, and your inheritance becomes their inheritance, and your culture is their culture. And obviously you have to do that in the international adoptions. There's all kinds of other things to conceive, but like you're creating a family in that same way. Now I just went back on myself for saying you're already a family when you're married, but such is the language of infertility. But I think that's it. I mean, I think that's the way it goes, because it is that sort of, and this, at the same time, when you have a biological child, that is also radical hospitality, because you don't know who's going to pop out after 9 months.
Right.
You're surprised in ways that are going to challenge you, are going to delight you all the time. And so I think realizing that children are a gift, that life is a gift, and that that's the way they should be received as well.
I have to say, my oldest son, I've seen him wearing a reverse baseball cap and a hoodie. And I am convinced he was swapped on a plane when we were flying between Britain and the US at some point. There's no way I produce somebody who wears a reverse baseball cap.
Oh, that's funny.
Leigh, one of the other, and this kind of made me sit back and take notice. You talk about breastfeeding your adopted kids. I didn't even know that it was kind of, wow. I didn't know that. I thought you had to have had a baby to breastfeed.
Yeah, I did too. And now so I had a friend who was a nurse midwife, and she was really, into, and plus, I mean, I was, I think a lot of people who adopt often are already like in their 30s and 40s. I was just in my late 20s and sort of, just more open to things, I think. And so with my girlfriend, we played like club soccer together, and we ran like marathons together in college. And she was just like, come on, you would have done it if you'd gotten pregnant. Just do it. And it was just sort of like this sort of like girl sporty thing. Like, come on, like, don't wimp out on this, like just see. And she was like, okay. And I was like, oh, I don't know. Because we didn't have very much time to get ready. And sometimes you have to do this whole protocol for months, and there's lots of different ways to do it. And I just thought, oh, and I have to get the cloth diapers. She was like, forget about the cloth diapers. Go to the Breastfeeding Center of Washington, D.C. and talk to a lactation consultant. And I'm like, okay. And so I went, and she introduced this protocol for me. I learned how to nurse, like holding a doll. So I took some medicine that's often given for, like, it's totally off label for lactation. And I think also, like, if oftentimes if you have infertility, you might have a little bit raised prolactin levels. I mean, everyone out there listening, I am not a doctor or anything like one, so talk to a lactation consultant if this interests you. But you can take medicine that, as a side of, you also have to do things like you have to pump, and you have to, try to eat certain things the same way you would be if you had a low supply, if you were breastfeeding and you had a low milk supply. But yeah, it doesn't always work, but it worked for me quickly, and it was really great to finally kind of get like a yes from my body, like, I'm going to show up for you. Yeah, it was great. And it was, I mean, my most success was with the first one because I only had one, and I was young. And then, as twins were tougher, but we got through a few months, and then the same with our last, we got through more, but it wasn't. I was sort of like, I just want to see if I can do it again. And then, let formula come in, which is so much, it was just pretty easy. Yeah. But no, but it's really great. And I encourage people to do it because it really is a nice, I mean, you're going to be, even if you didn't give birth to a newborn baby, if you've adopted a newborn, you're going to have all those, you're going to be tired. Luckily, your body won't be quite as beaten up, but you're still going to be tired. And the oxytocin boost that nursing can provide is just great. And also just to not feel like the weirdo in the room when you're with like, because young moms find each other. We get our babies together for play dates when they're just like dribbling, right? But it's just like everyone else is kind of like, okay, with the positioning and everything, and you get to do that too. You get to latch that little baby on too, and it's nice not to feel like be reminded again that, oh, I'm not like everybody else. But yeah, anyway.
Ties in beautifully as well with some of Carter's work on the importance of embodiment and
dependency.
So, I love the way that you express in narrative form some of the things that he's argued for in a more conceptual kind of way. So,
yeah, it's funny because I felt like we had just sort of, when I started with this book project probably 2 years ago, I felt like we were sort of just wrapping up what it means to be human, like as a household. And sometimes people would be like, well, what is the name of your book? And I would be like, what it means to be infertile. Because somehow it just all, in the Snead house, it just kind of all mushed into one book. And I'm like, no, that's not it. Yeah. Yeah. It's a family affair. You know how that goes.
Yeah.
I thought you made, and I would just, as a reminder to folks to think about this, you throw out a really great thought on one of the common objections to adoption for those who don't want to adopt is, you don't know what you're going to get. It might be a really troubled child and that kind of thing. And you remind us, right, just like when you're having your own children biologically. I mean, they might wear their baseball cap backwards, right,
That's
Carl?
right.
Oh, yes,
but
yeah.
I know the horror.
Yeah, exactly. You don't know. I mean, there are biological children who are superstars and others who will break your heart, and you don't know either way. And so again, the idea of kind of just being welcoming then. And I would also say to our listeners as well, because Leigh is classically pro-life, like we in the Protestant world, like we claim to be as well. Life begins at conception, and there are implications for that. Then you need to think through all these different issues. One is, for instance, IVF. When I was a new pastor, I don't remember anybody coming to me for counsel about IVF. Now they do. Now, fortunately, because we're seeing an uptick in some good Protestant thinkers now helping Protestants think through these things. I have young couples come who are very thoughtful on that, whereas 20 years ago, never. Now they'll come and say, hey, listen, we're really bothered by IVF. Our doctor told us to look into it. We're really bothered by this. And I'm so relieved when I hear them say that.
Yeah.
Because I'm able to say, yes, right, you're on the right track there. Here's why we want to steer you away from that. If we are going to claim that the Word of God instructs us that life begins at conception, then it has something to say about how we go about coming to the point of conception and what's acceptable and what's not acceptable.
Yeah, and I have read recently, I wish I could remember where I read things, but it was long form. So I'm thinking maybe The Atlantic or something, but it was about there are some doctors who are actually now, or maybe they're practicing like Christians themselves, but who are catering to the Protestant client who does care about it, doesn't see, it as, a grave sin or grave evil, like doesn't think that it's bad, but will you create 2 embryos and implant them no matter what, not creating excess.
Yeah.
So it's nice that doctors are even taking responsibility because we can all remember, right, when this Octomom, all these crazy things, everybody, that's why there's twins everywhere.
Right.
I always joke that my twins were like in so many ways just not supposed to be here. The threat of abortion, like it was not planned, and they're identical and they're huge, and I'm 5 feet tall. And it's just like, if they get into a fight with like another set of twins, they just have so much, like they just have been making it this whole time. They're just, anyway, infertility humor. So I think that's really great that that's happening. And I was really interested in this article. And it seems to me, too, that because the techniques are getting better, the excess embryo problem, it's probably because they don't have anywhere else to put them, right? We've got millions of embryos in storage, but it is becoming less of a problem. And apparently they are transferring just one or two at a time. I'm not jumping on the bandwagon. I'm not, whatever, jumping ship, but it is nice to see that there is some responsibility in that completely unregulated industry.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's good. Yeah. Well, I mean, this is one of those conversations that we could continue because there's so many things to talk about this issue, so many questions, so many implications for doing pastoral ministry and being a friend and all of those things. But I do want to encourage our listeners to get a hold of Leigh's book. Again, it's called Infertile But Fruitful, Finding Fulfillment When You Can't Conceive. It's a beautifully written book. It's moving, it's practical, it's thoughtful. There are questions raised. There are theological, biblical implications raised within this narrative as she unfolds her story. And our Protestant readers will benefit from it. Leigh does not hide her Catholicism and spring it on you. So, she writes from her experience
Sneaky
as a Catholic.
papist.
Yeah, exactly. She writes from her experience as a Catholic, which in a lot of ways just makes it, I think, easier for a Protestant to read, because I think you'll easily identify those things that are very much congruent with your own experience as a Protestant. And because Catholics have a much longer tradition than oftentimes Protestants do in terms of thinking through the implications of life beginning at conception and implications about, practical implications involving God's design for conjugal love. This is helpful for Protestants to process through. And so I certainly recommend it to you. You'll be moved by it, and it's moving not in a sappy way, but in a real substantive way, because she's sharing her own story about something that, for so many people I have known and been able to pastor, it's a painful story. And what I love about the way you've written this, Leigh, is you keep pointing towards the hopeful things. That while this is painful, and you don't deny the pain, you keep our eyes on that distinctive characteristic of the Christian, which is hopefulness. Yeah. So thank you for writing the book.
Oh, thank you for reading it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we want to invite our listeners to go to our website, mortificationofspin.org. And there you'll find a way to enter to win a copy of Leigh Fitzpatrick Snead's book. And while you're there, if you'd like to make a donation to the Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals, you can do that too, so we can continue to provide this sort of content. And we are grateful, again, for our guests, grateful for you, our listeners, and we look forward to being with you next time. I'm going to watch you shine, going to watch you grow, going to paint a sign so you'll always know. As long as 1 and 1 is 2, there could never be a father love his daughter more than I love you.
Thanks for listening to Mortification of Spin, a podcast of the Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals. For more on topics like this, visit mortificationofspin.org, where you can find other articles by Carl and Todd, browse the archive of past episodes, and make a donation. We'll talk to you next time on Mortification of Spin.